Hi, welcome back to Random Reading Pathways. I'm Matt. A couple days after the end of November here, and I kind of pieced together a little bit of participation in Nonfiction November. So I wanted to just sort of do a little quick wrap up of the Nonfiction November things that took place for me and kind of just go over those. So what I will have is a completed read from November. I will have a current read, also in the nonfiction vein, and a to be read. So I had one new TBR edition that was nonfiction that I snuck onto the TBR just at the end of November. So I will talk about that as well. So yeah, starting with nonfiction book that I finished in the month of November. Finished this a few days ago, and this was Speak Memory by Vladimir Nabokov. So this is kind of his autobiographical memoir. And yeah, this is my second Nabokov book I've read this year. And yeah, this is the first nonfiction I've read in quite a little while, and I really, really enjoyed this. The first interesting thing I wanted to point out about this, and this is sort of a word I learned, sort of a mythological figure that I was reacquainted with, but a little interesting tidbit about this is, so it's called Speak Memory, and really what Nabokov does in this is more or less just cycle through different parts of his youth. He recalls different scenes from his earlier life. He goes over specific memories in some great detail. But interestingly, he wanted to call this book, I came to learn, Speak Mnemosyne. And that word sounded familiar to me when I read it, but I was kind of a little clueless as to what that was. But yeah, so I jogged my memory on that. And Mnemosyne refers to, reading from Wikipedia here, in Greek mythology and ancient Greek religion, Mnemosyne is the goddess of memory. The term Mnemosyne is derived from the same source as the word mnemonic, that being the Greek word mnemem, I'm not sure about that, which means remembrance, memory. So Nabokov wanted to call this book Speak Mnemosyne, kind of in the tradition of the Greek figure Mnemosyne, dealing with being the goddess of memory. But he was dissuaded from calling it that. It appears due to, sort of pressure from his publisher and whatnot, editors who, didn't feel that title would be accessible enough, wouldn't be digestible enough. And even understood by most people. I do, looking back, think it is a beautiful word in and of itself, just the appearance of the word, and sort of the backdrop of it, and the history of being the Greek goddess of memory, adds a bit of a beauty to the whole idea of this book. And even though it's not called Speak Mnemosyne, I'm happy to have reacquainted myself with that figure from Greek mythology and that concept, because, like I said, this is basically a stitched together patchwork of Nabokov's early memories, and ranging from everything from, being a really, really young child and even a, toddler in those ages. And he had a wealthy upbringing, so he lived in this kind of country manor in Russia, to, different interests that he started developing. There's big portions of this book talking about his passion for butterfly hunting and capturing and categorizing. It turns out that, Nabokov, I guess, took that to a very, extensive degree, and ended up being a notable figure in the field of butterfly sort of categorization. So there's a butterfly named after him, and he goes over some really poignant and really beautiful scenes from his memory of him doing that, following butterflies through the forests that surrounded his childhood home. There's chapters devoted to his mother, to his father, to different caregivers he had, early romantic interests in his life. And then later in the book gets into kind of the period in his life when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in Russia, and he, along with thousands of others of a similar mindset, basically voluntarily exiled themselves from Russia and, made their way to other destinations. For him, it was Berlin. So he talks about that. There was some time in Paris as well. He talks about his first attempts at writing poetry, skirmishes he got into with other children, and he puts them all together so interestingly. Nabokov's writing and his prose, expectedly, as I went into this, did deliver very much on the Nabokov sort of promise of having beautiful, very evocative language. And what I really liked about this was, Nabokov's prose is obviously praised and very esteemed, and it reads that way throughout the whole thing. But what I enjoyed was each chapter, you can tell there's sort of a point at the end of the chapter where Nabokov, I feel, sort of consciously even up the ante a little further on his prose. And the way I would describe it is just each chapter in this ends with a really lyrical kind of flourish, a really beautiful paragraph or two that the prose is great all the way throughout, but he ended each chapter with a real flourish, and left you sort of with you need to take a breath before you move on to the next chapter. So yeah, so that was some of my favorite stuff about this, sort of in just a general sense. I have a couple things flagged here that I just wanted to point out, because one of the themes and concepts of this that I really got a lot out of, and that I think connects to something else, which I'll get to, is the idea of kind of time destruction in a way. So, in delving into these early memories of his, Nabokov implicitly, but also explicitly sometimes in the book, discusses the concept of time and playing with it, sort of ignoring it and doing away with time, and essentially inserting himself into different periods of his life to relive them. And there's a couple choice areas here that I flagged that I just kind of wanted to do a few excerpts, because it was kind of my favorite overall device that he employed in this book. And here he's talking about a river that was near St. Petersburg. And here he says, farther down its sinuous course, where the sand martins shot out of their holes in the steep red bank, it was deeply suffused with the reflections of great romantic firs, the fringe of our Vera being the name of his estate that he lived in. And still farther downstream, the endless, tumultuous flow of a water mill gave the spectator, his elbows on the handrail, the sensation of receding endlessly, as if this were the stern of time itself. So kind of, that imagery of playing with time, and even thinking back to specific scenes and memories from his childhood and from his upbringing, and putting this timelessness aspect to them. So here later on, there's another part here where he actually, this chapter 6 here, he's going into one of his butterfly hunts, and really beautifully recaps this scene of capturing these butterflies and chasing after them, and ends this chapter this way. I confess I do not believe in time. I like to fold my magic carpet after use in such a way as to superimpose one part of the pattern upon another. Let visitors trip. And the highest enjoyment of timelessness, in a landscape selected at random, is when I stand among rare butterflies and their food plants. This is ecstasy, and behind the ecstasy is something else which is hard to explain. It is like a momentary vacuum into which rushes all that I love. Yeah, so he uses that kind of language often in the book, almost where time doesn't even become important anymore. And then finally, there's another part here where this idea is kind of talked about again. And he says, but then, in a sense, all poetry is positional. To try to express one's position in regard to the universe embraced by consciousness is an immemorial urge. The arms of consciousness reach out and grope, and the longer they are, the better. Tentacles, not wings, are Apollo's natural members. Vivian Bloodmark, a philosophical friend of mine, in later years, used to say that while the scientist sees everything that happens in one point of space, the poet feels everything that happens in one point of time. So there you go again, just kind of another take on the timelessness issue here, and a little bit of Nabokov saying that, he feels himself a poet, I think, as well as an author. because he does go into this book sort of his early attempts at poetry, and he weaves poetry into some of his other writing that I've come across, notably Pale Fire, which is entirely based around an original fictional poem that he wrote. But the idea of a poet or an artist or an artistic person sort of tapping into that timelessness aspect, and he does that here with his own life and breaks it into little vignettes that make up Speak Memory. When I was thinking about the presentation of this timelessness idea that I thought Nabokov brought to the fore in his Speak Memory, the other book that I've read that I kind of had a little bit of a connection to and thought about was actually Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. So, basically, it's been a little while since I read this one, so I had to kind of refresh myself on it. But the main thing here is, in the story, Billy, the main character, gets into this part in the story where these weaved into this is this alien race, the Tralfamadorians. And when Billy in this book comes in contact with them, he goes on this whole time journey, time travel. He goes back to earlier parts of his life, future parts of his life. And in that way, in this, the idea of time as a construct kind of gets destroyed a little bit. And in this part, he's talking with one of the aliens, and I'll just read from the small little part here because it ties into kind of the next part of this video. So, "Where am I?" said Billy Pilgrim. "Trapped in another blob of amber, Mr. Pilgrim. We are where we have to be just now, 300 million miles from Earth, bound for a time warp which will get us to Tralfamador in hours rather than centuries. How did I get here? It would take another Earthling to explain it to you. Earthlings are the great explainers, explaining why this event is structured as it is, telling how other events may be achieved or avoided. I am a Tralfamadorian, seeing all time as you might see a stretch of the Rocky Mountains. All time is all time. It does not change. It does not lend itself to warnings or explanations. It simply is. Take it moment by moment, and you will find that we are all, as I've said before, bugs in amber." "You sound to me as though you don't believe in free will," said Billy Pilgrim. "If I hadn't spent so much time studying Earthlings," said the Tralfamadorian, "I wouldn't have any idea what was meant by free will. I visited 31 inhabited planets in the universe, and I have studied reports on 100 more. Only on Earth is there any talk of free will." So that concludes kind of the connection to Slaughterhouse-Five and Speak Memory, in the sense of there's an idea being played with here by both of these in their own way of deconstructing time and viewing it all through one continuous lens and not having it be moment to moment sequentially, and instead just being sort of a tapestry that can be viewed all at once. And so taking me right to my next part of this video, which is, as I said earlier, I have a nonfiction current read, and I usually pick my next read randomly, but I happened to be going to the library the other day with my family, and I knew that there was another book that was on my TBR, and it was still November, and I thought, you know what, let me grab one more nonfiction since I'm going to be at the library, and this is the only place I can get this book. So I did finally I talked about this in a couple other videos, I've mentioned it, but I finally did get my hands on Determined by Robert Sapolsky from the library. So basically, it's a science of life without free will. That's the argument being made here by Sapolsky from a biological neuroscience standpoint. And the argument's going to be that there is no free will. And so it's just very interesting to me to have the random part of Slaughterhouse-Five that I opened to end with the alien explaining to Billy Pilgrim that when you deconstruct time, you view it all at once. You basically realize only on Earth is there any talk of free will. So I happened to read that part, and I had already started on Sapolsky's Determined. So he's going to try to argue there's no free will from a scientific and a evolutionary standpoint. I'm on board for that argument. I'm excited to see how he lays that out, because it's something that I have sort of subscribed to in my own thinking before. And it is even something that I think drives a little bit of how I choose to read. So yeah, I'm only a little bit of the way into this, but I will try to report back with some coherence if I can. This is quite a hefty scientific centered read, but yeah, so that is my current standalone read right now, and I did start reading it in the month of November, so I think it still qualifies as part of this Nonfiction November sort of wrap up here. And let's see, the last part I wanted to mention was, yeah, also before the month of November ended, I was able to add one more nonfiction book to my TBR. And that book is Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell by Ann Powers. So the way I came to this book and the way it came onto my path, so it kind of slipped out of my mind a little bit as November went on, but when I saw the title of this book, it came rushing back that Nonfiction November on BookTube this year was sponsored, I guess, in part, or there was some guidance that was provided by a channel called a Book Olive, and I think she's done that in years past from what I've come to learn. But what a Book Olive did on her channel is she posted a Nonfiction November sort of list of words that you could use if you so choose to guide your Nonfiction November reading. And it just so happened one of the words that she chose was path. And I just so happened to start this BookTube channel called Random Reading Pathways a little bit before that was posted. And I came across this book just at the end of November, Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell. So the way I saw it actually was I found it on pitchfork.com. I used to be like a religious pitchfork.com reader and follower of like their music reviews and stuff. Not so much anymore these days, but especially toward the end of the year, I still do check in to see kind of what their year-end wrap-up looks like and things like that. But I noticed on their site they had a new piece that was up that was the best music books of 2024. So, naturally I clicked on that, and scrolling down a couple, I quickly came across Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell. So just want to read Pitchfork's little quick 2-paragraph write-up here of this book, and it even more so thrusted it onto my TBR when I read the write-up of it. So, those in search of a standard issue Joni Mitchell biography had best look elsewhere. Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell is a document of obsession written for obsessives, a book whose first pages are dedicated to figuring out whether to call its subject Joni or Mitchell, eventually settling on a blend of the two. And author Ann Powers demonstrates how Mitchell and her music can embed themselves in our lives by weaving her own personal story into Traveling's narrative. Indulging in her passion for Mitchell, Powers actually manages to restore some mystery to the legendary artist, whose story and rough edges have been sanitized over time, especially by men such as Robert Plant, Graham Nash, James Taylor, who wrote songs about her. Powers pointedly chose not to interview her central subject, but it ends up bringing Traveling closer to Mitchell and her chords of inquiry, free to contradict itself, free to ask questions and not answer them, free to follow its author's ramblings, whims, and fascinations wherever they may go. So, while that may turn off some people from reading this, and I find it interesting that in a write-up of a biography, this reviewer here chose to say, those in search of a standard issue biography best look elsewhere. So, but that's not me. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for whatever catches my random reading pathway kind of attention. And yeah, one that seems to be an author's rambling whims and fascinations wherever they may go, especially on the subject of Joni Mitchell, who's another favorite artist of mine from that time period, certainly appeals to me. So yeah, that's Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell. And so you have the word path that lines up for that with the channel, and also with Nonfiction November. And the write-ups of this book that I've seen definitely further the point that I should add this one. So yeah, November hadn't ended yet by the time I came across this book and added it to the TBR, so that is the final update from me for Nonfiction November, which is another TBR edition. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of a wrap-up of, a couple aspects of Nonfiction November, and November itself, I guess. And that's it for now. So thanks to anybody who stuck through this to the end, and I'll be back with some more updates soon. Thanks.